some level of agency that still needs to occur at some point to say, okay, what direction are you going to move in terms of your life as a person?
What equal and opposite force would you have expected to push against the trajectory that created the culture? Like what are you looking at that would show you this is things that should have changed that?
Where we are at now, to what extent is that still an issue?
My mother still reaped the benefits of that oppression literally 5 years ago. My dad had to drink from blacks only fountains. So this isn't reparations for just slavery. This would be reparations for the ongoing systemic oppressions still impacting black Americans today.
Ethnicity and what you call it, race.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
So you were following? Did you understand the point I was making?
Yeah, no. I understand what you're saying. I think when I made my comment about what Tariq was doing, I was more referring to him like kind of like trying to denigrate immigrants and kind of do this new thing where he's doing where he's trying to maybe push like black Americans against black immigrants, which has been weird. Like I've been seeing it like for a few weeks now where he's like posting stuff about black immigrants and what they do to black Americans. I think some of it actually I could kind of see the arguments there.
Okay.
But there was one I mean there was the recent incident which kind of like, you know, maybe kind of think, what is he doing? Like where, you know, I don't know if you've seen the story about the woman who got hit by a brick or something.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, I saw the story, but out of nowhere, you know, he just posted, oh, it was done by black immigrants or something. I think he had like a derogatory term for it, but I can't really remember what he said.
I think he said tethers or something, right?
Yeah. So from that point, okay, yeah. So this is like, I think this is like some kind of new thing he's trying to do, which is kind of like paint this whole, like, oh, like black immigrants are against black Americans and whatever kind of thing. So I think that's kind of what I was referring to when I was talking about differences and stuff.
The thing is that bothers me is, one, it's not new. He's been on this for a minute, and it's kind of like it annoys me because like a lot of what his platform used to be were things that I like wholeheartedly agree with. And man, I guess first off, I have to say I don't fully disagree with some of the points that he's making. Like my whole point, the reason why this thread even like started going the way it is was because I was saying, I was commenting and basically saying that I think the biggest threat, the bigger threat to black Americans, the thing that's having the biggest impact is that of white supremacy. So then if that's the case, then the idea that we would be dedicating a large amount of energy towards immigrants doesn't make a lot of sense. That's what I'm saying. Like, while that does not dismiss the fact that yes, there are obviously issues. Like we can track those things. There have been studies done where they've like discussed the fact that black immigrants do hold very anti-black American sentiments. And a lot of that has to do with American media and things like that. The biggest threat still facing black Americans is white supremacy, and not white supremacy perpetuated by black immigrants, if that makes sense. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. I mean, do you know, I didn't even know there was I think like about 2 years ago was when I found out that there was a lot of like
antagonism,
like yeah between black immigrants and, you know, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Right.
I just out of nowhere I just saw like on like about 2 years ago, I just saw like this thing about this post on YouTube basically talking about, oh, like, you know, black immigrants have come here, they're taking our jobs, and then I was like, oh shit, I didn't even know that was a thing. Like, I thought we were all like, you know, together and doing all this. I mean, I'm Nigerian. I'm Nigerian heritage, so I know definitely. Even within my culture, there's definitely derogatory perspectives about, you know, black Americans. That's a given. But I've always felt like when it comes down to it, it's just like, we're just the same people. Like we just kind of view each other as brothers and whatever. So I didn't really know it was really a big thing where people were like, oh, really? Like, oh, no, we're separate. We have to be different and whatever. So yeah, that's when I started to realize, okay, yeah, this is actually a thing. Like, okay, yeah, this is a thing where.
Because I think even within that sentiment, though, right? Like what you're identifying is, yes, I know that our people have kind of held these sentiments, but it basically, I didn't understand that this was a thing that was even spoken about, that they were even aware about, that they were even like motivated about or mobilized around.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think, to be honest with you, I think still to this day, for a large amount of us, they're not aware, they're not mobilized against it. They just kind of accept as just, they have the same mentality that you do. Earlier this year, I was having a conversation with someone about Pan-Africanism, and I was on the side of Pan-Africanism. I still believe in the concept that the same way almost every other ethnicity kind of has this way of unifying whenever it comes to outside forces, I think that we would probably benefit from the same thing. But that would require the people that we want to unify with to be on code and to want to unify in that way. And in order to unify, then you can't be antagonistic towards me. We should be able to see from the same lens, right? In order for us to have a common goal, in order for us to unify against white supremacy. But if I'm trying to unify with a person who is actively and willingly perpetuating and participating in white supremacy, then that's not going to be to my benefit, right? So like I was on the wrong, well, I can't say it was the wrong side. Because some of my best friends are of immigrant descent. Literally two of my closest friends that I've interacted with over the last year and a half, my boy Jeff and my brother Inside, both of them, one's from St. Kitts Island and the other one is Haitian. They're born here. But both of them are two of my closest friends, people who I respect more than, pretty much anybody else in the country, dang near. And neither one of them are antagonistic towards black people. So it's not, I would never develop the mentality that everybody is that way. But I think that there is enough of it happening. And I think it would be ignorant of us to pretend as if like it isn't there, for us to just pretend like, yeah, no, it's totally fine. There's no issue, etc. I don't think that's a good idea.
To what extent do you think it happens, and to what extent do you think it has an impact? Like, because I feel like there is I would say there is possibly anti-African American perspectives, but not to the extent that I would think there's like a need to be antagonistic. Like for instance, like my mom might have perspectives where she's like, oh, she's maybe derogatory to African Americans, but she would never have them to the point where she would feel like, oh, I don't want you to ever be with an African American, or I never want you to interact with them or do anything with them. So it's like, to what extent is it having an impact on African Americans, do you think, these perspectives?
I don't know how we would quantify it for sure, but what I think that we've determined is that, like, well, for one, the extent would be in the sense of, I think that the concept of not wanting your child to be with the person of African American descent is pretty common. And I would also say that if you notice, pretty much the vast majority of anti-black voices that happen to be black themselves, they're all, the vast majority of them are black immigrants. For example, you could look at someone like Candace Owens, right? Also known as Candace Owens. A large portion of her platform is very, very anti-black. There's no way around that. And she happens to be of immigrant descent. And in fact,
really?
Yes.
She's an immigrant?
Yes. And you can,
wow, I didn't even know that.
It's crazy. Look, you can just take this for granted, though. It's like any person you hear of that is holding like these anti-black sentiments, you can pretty much assume that they're of immigrant descent, because it's so common that it's mind-boggling. So I think at this point, it really boils down to, I guess, yeah, it becomes. Really,
you would say that? What, like Larry Elder, all these kind of guys? You would say they're immigrants?
Larry Elder is not an immigrant. There are going to be exceptions, right? Neither is Justice Thomas, but I would say any of the younger voices that are doing so, that they've been some of the perpetuation. Those people are the vast majority of them are black immigrants. If you look at pretty much any of the black people, besides, like, if you look at, like, there's some old Sambos and those people are like different, but I'm saying of the younger generation, of like the current youthful media that happen to be like perpetuating white supremacy, the anti-reparations conversations, most of those things are coming specifically from immigrant people. And I've seen montages of it, and I genuinely, oh man, I it seems to be pretty common. So I think, for one, I think it becomes problematic in the extent that it furthers the narrative of the people who want our harm, right? In the sense that a lot of them will use those voices and say, hey, these people, see, there's a black person who agrees with me. So then at that point, then they can kind of dismiss the ongoing harms that we're seeing happening and perpetuated against black Americans. Furthermore, the immigrant community does do significantly better than us. And that has a lot to do with several things. One, obviously the wealth of the parents typically when they're immigrating, because the typical person who immigrates to this country, or who migrates to this country, they typically have a lot more wealth. You have to think you're already selecting for the people who are doing the best amongst their countrymen in order for them to have the financial ability to come to the United States. So then those people already have financial security such that they're able to skirt some of the things that are aimed at the impoverished black Americans. So then you already have that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that.
We can look it up. You can look that up. Like the average person,
Really?
the average income of people who migrate to the average wealth and income of people who migrate to this country is significantly higher than black Americans, than the average black American. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I'm positive.
As in, you're saying that the people that are coming from Africa,
Mm-hmm.
with even from the, in terms of the equity they have in Africa is greater than black Americans.
Yes, because black Americans, like the you understand that, like, the wealth of black Americans will reach $0 by 2053, right? Like, you already understand that, like, black Americans are like overly represented within poverty, overly represented within.
Oh yeah. I understand the poverty aspect. I understand that.
So
but
then,
I mean,
if that's the case, do you think that the black immigrants have the same levels of poverty relative?
So I don't. It's difficult just because most of the immigrants I've ever known, other African immigrants that I've known, I think in terms of thinking about wealth in Africa, I would say definitely most of the Africans coming to America or the UK, where I'm based right now. Most of them do have, obviously they have a lot more wealth than most other Africans, because to be able to afford a ticket to get into the country, you need to have that wealth. But when they actually get into the country, I would say it's a minimal amount that actually have the wealth of the people already in the country. From my perspective, I mean, for like in my family, for example, one of my uncles, he has a house. He owns a house in the UK. So he's wealthy enough that he can have a house in the UK and also live primarily in Nigeria. But most of my other family members, they don't have that level of wealth. They are all essentially on government welfare. Some of them do own businesses, but they've had to like kind of build up
Sure.
as they've
So then think about it this way.
they've lived in the country. So,
If someone from your family was to come to the country, now
Yeah.
this might not be the actual case, but more likely the person from your family selection most likely to come to the States would be the one with the wealth, the one with the ability to do so. So then if that wealthy uncle was the one to come to the States, then that wealthy uncle would obviously not be in the same financial straits as the average black American. And so then you start looking at and you start seeing where, again, that's where the selection comes in. The people more likely to migrate are the people with more wealth. And so then if the people have more wealth, then the people with more wealth are likely to have better family structures, right? And then the people with better family structures and more wealth are more likely to be able to attain education. And then those people are more likely to have a better income. And then as a result of that, they're not going to be in the exact same situations as impoverished black Americans. Because if you think about it this way, poverty isn't just the state of not having wealth. It also has like long-term deleterious effects. For example, debt, right? It's not just about, hey, I don't have any wealth. It's about having large amounts of debt. It's about having all of the other systemic trauma that's currently impacting people today. Like, for example, I'm pretty sure you've heard about like how some young African Americans are being like where like a mother might open up lines of credit in her children's name before they're even like 12 years old in order to be able to like try to make ends meet. And so as a result of that, you have young Black Americans who are in debt before they're even 18 years old. And to the contrary, you'll find that I remember one of my best friends, or one of my good friends rather, his parents, when he was 18 years old, the day he turned 18, they opened up credit cards in his name and continued to pay their mortgage on his credit card and pay it off every month. And they did that with multiple lines of credit to establish his credit. So by the time we were like 25, he already had excellent credit, not from his own doing, but because his parents just recognized the need for it and were already investing that into him from a very, very young age. That type of opportunity is not present for the average Black American who's just trying their best to make ends meet and to survive, right? So I would say that there is a very vast different culture and understanding that comes with, from Black Americans to other folks.
Mm. Wasn't there, I think there was to what extent do you think culture has has relevance? I mean, I saw a study, I can't remember, I think it was like 5 or something so years ago, that said that the reason why all these other minorities are maybe doing a bit better is a cultural push for education and academia. To what extent do you think that has a role to play, culture, and to what extent do you think the system has a role to play on the issue?
Well, listen, while it's true, I think that those other people value education.
Because I have a perspective as well. I have on it. I want to hear what you say. Think first.
Okay, I think it has a humongous impact, but then I think we have to question where the culture comes from. For example, if you look and we think literally one generation for me, right? One generation ago, my parents were going to my dad had to go to segregated school and drink from from blacks only fountains, and wasn't allowed certain types of employment and wasn't able to use certain bathrooms and so on and so forth, right? So that was one generation ago, where the poverty, he was from Florida, and so where you look at like where the poverty lines and things like that were, then you can see already where that's going to have a humongous impact on the educational aspects of him, considering the circumstances that he was brought up in. So then I don't think that it's just a matter of a different attitude. I think it's a matter of institutionalized like normality of just figuring out like you're going to have to just go ahead and scrape by and figure out how to make things work. Like the Fair Housing Act wasn't passed until they were both of my parents were in high school. So this is literally one generation ago. So then it's like the idea that it's just, we just don't value education is obviously a false one. I think it has more so to do with the idea that the normalcy, the normalization, that's what I mean. The normalization of recognizing that as soon as you have the ability to work, you need to work to make ends meet. Like that's what's been normalized for them. And I think that it makes all the sense why it would be normalized. But I think to then just say, well, yeah, you guys don't value education, is just absolutely not true. I think Black people do value education. It's just that from youth, the education that they receive is so piss poor that it isn't really seen as an opportunity. If your school is impoverished, you don't have access to like after school programs or good quality education because of funding and things like that have been done very, very negatively, then where do you think you're going to develop the attitude that education is like paramount? Where is that supposed to come from?
Yeah, for me it's a difficult one. I think the reason why I think the cultural aspect plays a big role is just because I think I don't know if you know this guy called Makala. He's like a British rapper from the UK. Basically he's kind of like veered off from rapping. Now he's just kind of like he's a cultural kind of commentator. So he speaks a lot about racial issues in the UK and kind of how the system has oppressed Black people in the from the past and how that's impacting us now. One of the things he mentioned was how was basically how, you know, as the generations of immigrants become more acclimated to the culture they're in, then a lot of the issues that you saw in that you would normally see in, you know, black youths within this within the what do you call it? What would you call it? Within the original base of black people within a country, you start to see those same issues within those same immigrant second or third generations. Um, so I think, so for me, I think that's one of the indications of how important culture is. I think the issue for Black Americans, like you've mentioned, I think is just when you've undergone, like, you know, I see, like, when I listen to Larry Elder and a lot of these black conservatives, and they speak about, you know, the role of the individual in terms of you know, maximizing the outcomes in your life. I see that perspective, but then I also see the perspective of how, when you've had so much oppression, how that colors your perspective in terms of in terms of your viewpoint, of, you know, your future outcomes. You know, so I can see it's almost like a catch-22 situation, where it's like, I acknowledge that there's certain things that, you know, Black Americans need to do, but when they've been brought up in environments whereby these things are not kind of prioritized or pushed to the forefront of thought, then how does that work? Because ultimately, every human being is going to be, you know, in many ways colored by their parents and those around them. But when you're in these environments, how then do you succeed when people are kind of impinging on you these kind of perspective of how to survive? So if you're in Chicago, for example, and you're around a lot of other kids who tell you that, well, yeah, you know, the way you know, what you need to do is engage in criminal behavior and stuff. How do you change that kind of what's the word,
So
conveyor belt of
okay,
kind of like, because I feel like the issue in a lot of Black communities is a situation whereby you have parents who have undergone, you know, this oppression, and then they kind of almost teach it to their kids, and then it's like repeating the cycle over and over again kind of situation.
I
How do you
disagree.
change that cycle?
I don't think it's the parents teaching this thing to their kids. I think it's the culture, and the culture is caused by the environment, and the environment is shaped by the laws and things around those things, right? So I think to place it on the individuals as opposed to looking at the systems that create it is a little ridiculous, right? For example, the Great Migration. Are you aware of that phrase or what that means?
The Great Migration, was that when like a lot of immigrants came to America?
No. No, the Great
Well,
Migration
okay,
is a
yeah.
reference to
No,
the time when
I don't know that. I don't
it's
know what that
okay.
means.
No problem. No problem. The Great Migration is a reference to a time period, I want to say shortly before the Civil Rights Movement, but I want to say like early 1900s all the way to like the mid 50s, when a large swath of Black people left the South to go to the North to look for opportunity, right? Because obviously the South had ongoing Jim Crow. That's where like the deepest and most disgusting forms of systemic oppression, anti-Black systemic oppression, were still in effect, right? And so Black people were leaving the South to look for opportunity, right? And while they're doing so, they get there to the North, where the North basically is creating these opportunities for white people, but denying those same opportunities to Black people. So instead of you being able to get access to decent housing and things like that, instead what they're doing is they're putting them into ghettos. You guys can have these high-rise apartments, et cetera, et cetera. We'll give you, if we give you employment, it's going to be the worst forms of employment, which is going to be paying you the least, et cetera, et cetera. So then you're still like subjected to insane amounts of poverty. We'll let you we'll let you clean our houses, we'll let you do servant work, but we won't give you any industrial work really, and things like that. And so then when you're living in those sorts of conditions and dejection starts settling into a group of people who are impoverished and don't have opportunity, what else are you going to do? And so then at this point now, you're seeing the other people who have all of this wealth and et cetera, etc. And you're recognizing that these things are being denied you. So it's setting in a sense of dejection, a sense of depression, a sense of frustration, and all of those things, and a lack of community. And so then as a result of that, you have these people who start functioning not like a society, not like a community, but looking out specifically for themselves. Crime is going to increase, robbery is going to increase, hook and crook, you're going to try to find a way of making whatever ends meet you can, without the respect of a society that normally says, I don't want to do harm to my society because I'm a member of this society. You don't feel like a member of the society when none of the goals and ambitions of the society are actually present in you or your kin. So as a result of this, it ends up creating this crime-ridden, violent, depressed, non-opportunistic culture. And so then that stuff is again created by policy. So then to look at that and then say, no, you black people, y'all decided to perpetuate this thing, and not look at it like, no, it's a group of people who really didn't have opportunities, have never been able to actually get the economic justice necessary to them, have been denied and thwarted at every opportunity that they could get, that the society has recognized was necessary and provided it for white people, but then have turned around and not provided it for black people. And then those people are now being looked at as the people who are perpetuating this stuff, and it's not the culture and society that has created this thing, and we're not looking at them. That to me seems like it's unfair.
I feel like the culture has contributed to the thing, but I'm not sure it's
what created the culture.
Simply down to the culture.
What created the culture?
Well, obviously, the Jim Crow laws and all the other laws that were, made to oppress black people contributed. But I just, for me, I struggle to just say that it's just the laws, and I think there has to be some level of agency attributed to people. Otherwise, how do you cause change? I think
I'll tell you how you cause change. Look. Without blaming the victims, you can cause change by changing the policies and providing the opportunities that you gave to everybody else. For example, let's look at it something like this, right? When the government would recognize that the entire country was doing completely abysmally, and it looked like people were just completely dejected, blacks and whites alike, during the Great Depression, what did the government do to change that? Did they change the individuals or try to change their culture, or did they provide them opportunities for economic mobility? The New Deal was just that. The New Deal was them saying, hey, first off, we're going to give you guys welfare. We're going to give you guys money and opportunity so that way you're not literally starving and your children, whatever, so you're not getting desperate enough to start robbing and murdering and doing all of these other things, hook and crook, to make it right. That's what we'll do for you. Now, they didn't give that same welfare to black people. First off, they denied it to black men. Secondly, when they said, hey, for black women, if you guys want this, you need to destroy your family. Your husband cannot be in the house if we're going to give you this welfare. So you understand why that would be obviously destructive to a family, to have a man be making a decision between literally staying there and letting his children starve, or staying in the home, risking his wife being charged with fraud, or leaving, looking for other for economic opportunity so that their family can eat. Right? Like, you can understand how those two things would be there. Then the government also decided, hey, what you need obviously is a stable community, and you need the ability to have a home, right, to protect you and your family, so that you guys can actually start developing this economic growth. And what do? They end up creating the Fair Housing Administration, and then they start doing these FHA loans, and they start creating these, literally subsidizing suburbs and communities next to large industrial centers where employment would be plenteous, and then saying, by the way, are plentiful, and then saying only white people are allowed inside of these communities. Right? But we knew that this would create economic benefits for white people, right? Because we know, hey, well, here's where the job is. Here's where you'll be able to get a good education because all these houses will be paying for. Here's where we're going to go ahead and give you government-backed loans, so that way you'll actually qualify for loans where you otherwise wouldn't. And so then now that way you're going to develop a house. Now you have a place to raise your children. You'll develop a job. These homes are going to generate equity and wealth so that you'll be able to pay for your children's college, et cetera, which used to be free. And all of those things, and we're giving you the culture to allow you economic mobility. These things were handed down by the government. Then they did during this exact same time, they also were doing, what's it called? the loans for the not loans the loans for the people from the military, the GI Bill, which accounted for 20% of home purchases during this period. 20%, 1/5 of every home was through that GI Bill, not to mention all the ones through the FHA loans, which were also denied to black people. So we know all these people coming back from the military, we're going to give you the education, basically have your education be completely free. We're going to give that to you. We're going to give you like interest-free or zero down payment homes that the government will back for you, so that you can again be part of these communities, assimilate back into the culture, etc., etc., etc. All of these things create mobility. And what happens to young children born in that kind of environment? An environment where everyone owns their home, everyone's working at a job, everyone recognizes the benefit of education and has the realistic prospect that going to education will be financially paid for by the house that they're living in. And you're creating that. Meanwhile, you're denying every single one of those things to black people. Tell me how you expect the culture. How do you blame black culture and not blame the system that created the culture? How does that happen?
I think you can blame both, Con. You can blame the system and you can blame the culture.
But the culture is caused by the system. How do you blame the reaction? Oh, let me ask a better question. Let me ask a better question. Okay. What do you think that it's realistic to expect a different culture than that caused and created by the system? Is that realistic?
I think it depends on it. I think it depends on the time frame, isn't it? So if you're talking about immediately after those those laws were enacted and enforced, then of course I think it would be difficult to have a different culture. I guess the question would be where we are at now. Mm-hmm. To what extent is that still an issue?
Oh, it's still an issue. Well, obviously, what has changed what would have changed since then to have made it be different? What are you expecting? Obviously, what do they say? An object in motion is going to remain in motion unless opposed by an equal and opposite force. What would be the equal and opposite force that would change that culture or change that trajectory? What are you looking at that would make you expect people to be different? Because we're not right now, we're talking about expectations, not what you wish, not what would be best. We're talking about expectations, and I think people are pretty predictable. Like if you know that the opportunities aren't there, you're still being actively systemically denied, the wealth isn't there, which is obviously one of the most necessary components to like transcend and mobilize. If these things aren't there, what are you expecting to change things?
So you would say that there's no opportunities right now for Black Americans in terms of getting jobs or higher education.
I think if you use absolutes are obviously going to be ridiculous the vast majority of times. So I wouldn't say that there's no opportunities, but what I'm going to say is that the opportunities are obviously different, and I'm going to say that those opportunities are pretty scant for people who are already victims of like systemic oppression. For example, going into my mother's example, okay, I think like she would be like the conservative's dream, right? She would be the I pulled myself up by my bootstrap kind of person, her and my father, right? But in reality, like it was truly, I mean, obviously I'm a pretty religious person. It was truly God that created the opportunities that allowed her to succeed in the environment that she did. I mean, I look at the fact that the place that we moved to, she had to sue them through the Better Business Bureau and the People of Fair Housing, which are both institutions that are meant to protect against discrimination, because they were actively discriminating against her and not allowing her to move into that apartment complex. So that's how the only way we got into the apartment complex that we did, which so happened to be on the decent side of town, which just so happened to be able to be really close to the local college that she ended up going to and the education that my siblings and I got. If she didn't sue them, that she wouldn't have gotten that. If she didn't have the wherewithal and the knowledge that, hey, there are institutions that will protect me from this obvious discrimination, and the only way she was able to prove that there was discrimination was because she happened to have a friend who was applying for the exact same apartment that was telling her that there wasn't any room who was able to get the apartment. So then it was very clear, oh, so you did have room, you are discriminating against me, which is where she was able to bring that case forward. So then we can look at that opportunity and say, okay, that happened because of a lawsuit. Now, the average person isn't going to be doing a lawsuit. The average person is going to accept the results and not have the proof to be able to demonstrate, hey, you guys are discriminating against me. So then, like, I look at that mobility and I say, okay, so it wasn't just that, oh, she just had grit. I think there was a little bit of luck that we happen to have a friend there. It's a little bit of luck that the Bureau actually took her case, and she got the right person, and that they were able to prove it. So then I look at those kind of things and I think, how many people would have just accepted those results, not being able to prove it? So am I going to sit there and say, oh man, she was special? Or am I going to sit there and say, oh yeah, if everyone did that, they would just be able to prove it, or everyone would be in a better place? It's like, no, I don't expect the average person to do that, obviously. So then what we're looking at is normative, right? What is the typical and expected outcome given the circumstances? And I'll say for all Black people, there are scant opportunities for people who are impoverished and things like that. And the system has been changed even since my mother, such that she could never do what she did at the time. She went to school on welfare, by the way. She during that time, she enrolled in the community college, got her bachelor's degree, and then her master's degree on welfare. That's not even allowed anymore. You're not allowed to use to pursue education while on welfare. Like you have to be actively working a job. So then if you're actively working a job, while raising children, the likelihood of you being able to go to school at the same time starts being extremely difficult. And that's something.
Wait, what do you mean you're not? What do you mean you're not allowed to pursue? What do you mean you're not allowed to pursue education if you're on welfare? What, you can't get loans for that, or?
No, it's just that back in the day, you weren't required to be part of the GAIN program in order to be on welfare, and there wasn't like a specific time limit. So what my mother did was, while on welfare, she enrolled herself in school, and that's what she did full time. She was actually doing overtime in school. Bill Clinton in 96 ended up doing a welfare. In 94. Did a welfare reform act, which then said you have to be registered in the GAIN program, which means you have to get basically low income. You have to be working one of those low income jobs like Walmart or McDonald's or something like that, trying to look for quote unquote gainful employment, which is really just a trap. You have to be doing that while on welfare. So then that prevents you from being able. So what my mother did at the time originally, she was just in school full time. Once they made that change, she was going to have to drop out of school in order to get a job at like McDonald's or Walmart, or like I said, some low income place, minimum wage place. Because of the fact she had been seeing a psychologist at the time, the psychologist made the rule, or basically told the GAINS program that he was putting her on leave because of the fact that she was overstressed, that she was running into problems with her marriage at the time, and she had obviously 7 children, 6 of whom I think she was currently raising. My oldest brother had already moved out, and so during that time he said she's on stress leave, and he gave her, I think, 18 months. She went to the dean of the school to allow herself to enroll in overtime at the college, meaning more units than like what's typically even allowed. She had to get permission from the dean to do so, and then worked overtime, was taking like, I want to say 5 classes a semester as opposed to the typical 3, in order to hurry up and finish so that she could get her master's degree, right? That type of thing, of which, by the way, she got lucky. She just so happened to be in the administration office at the time when the dean was there, happened to just like get into a conversation with that person who just happened to say, oh, I believe in you, I'll give you the approval to let you work overtime. Happened to have a psychologist who happened to say, yeah, we'll go ahead and give you, this time off, or we'll give you this leave to allow you to stay in school, and happened to have just enough time to be able to graduate. So then by the time she would have been kicked off welfare, it's like, oh, I got a master's degree. And so she was immediately able to get like really good employment at the time. Like, again, there's so many circumstances. Do I think that the average person would have known that, Dean? The average person would have been able to get the time off? No, that's not realistic. These opportunities aren't even available. If I was living right now and I had the exact same circumstances as my mother did during that time, with the exact same mentality, I could not replicate what she did. The laws don't even allow it anymore.
Yes, supposing like a person wanted to like get some level of education now, what would they have to do? What would they have to do? Night school and have a job at the same time?
Yeah, they'd have to do night school and have a job at the same time while continuing to raise their family. I mean, while doing the game program, yeah. So they do the game program, which whatever, which is not realistic. So then that brings us back to the original question, right? Because my mother is obviously an exception who did amazing things. Okay, so then the question becomes that I asked earlier: what equal and opposite force would you have expected to push against the trajectory that created the culture? Like what are you looking at that would show you this is things that should have changed that? Because I think, again, the outcome is normative. Given the culture, given the paucity of opportunities, then it would make sense that we would be in that same direction.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very honest. I didn't know the extent of the. I mean, I knew it was bad. The oppression was bad. I didn't know the extent of the laws, and how they, kind of synchronized to kind of cause those issues. So yeah, I mean, when you put it that way, it's difficult to have an answer, really, if I'm being honest.
Absolutely. And I respect you for even saying that. You know how many people instead just jump and just start grasping for straws? And I think that is what's the common experience. And I'm not trying to degrade you, because you seem like a pretty rational person. But what happens with a lot of these immigrant people is that they're completely unaware of how the system has created these things. And then they just are looking at the people and saying, like, as you were saying, it's just the culture. It's you. Where we're saying, no. This culture is caused by the system. And until you change the system, the culture is normative. So then but if you're unaware, if you're not aware that, well, you guys got welfare. And it's like, well, yeah, so did white people, but they didn't force black men out of the home when they did so. Well, yeah, but you guys had employment opportunities. It's like, yeah, but white people got real employment opportunities at the factories in these suburb communities, which were not located in the cities. So then, like, you look at like the other thing that's supposed to be a leg up, right? The fair housing and Section 8. Well, Section 8 for black people was putting them in projects where there was like a scarcity of even employment opportunity, right? And the education was abysmal. Whereas public assistance with housing assistance for white people were single family units located in suburbs where they could literally work the same jobs as their white counterpart. I mean, as the other white people that they were denying to black people. So then it's like, okay, like, yeah, when white people were down on their luck, the government went out of their way, like I said, through education, through housing, through employment training and opportunities to make them like be able to succeed. When black people were down on their luck, they were just like, nah, we're not going to give that to you. Or if we do, it'll always be so bad as to create even worse circumstances. That's the difference. But people like who don't know this will blame the people, the individuals. Oh, you're making a bad choice. Where it's like, no. If white people were given the exact same circumstances, they would make identical choices. Poverty is what creates crime. Poverty is what creates criminality. Lack of opportunity is what creates dejection, and that dejection creates the sociopathic outlook towards society. When have white people had to endure that? And when they have, in certain places, that's where you see like obviously like a breakdown in community and things like that, where drugs and meth and all those other drugs and all those other like that breakdown happens. This is normative. This is what you can expect. So until we get something of equal and opposite force to stop that trajectory, it'll never fix itself.
Okay, so what would you? I mean, you've kind of given a
great
kind of good a good example of how your mom was able to kind of ascend because of the laws that were present then, in terms of her being able to be on welfare and also still go to community college and then go to uni and finish her masters. Would you just reverse those kind of laws and bring them back?
No.
And if you were to go through, if you were to go through like the route of reparations, how would you enforce those reparations in terms of, how would you lay them out? Because obviously, how would you even tell who was a descendant of slaves back then,
it's really simple. So there's a bunch of censuses and things like that where they literally kept track of like the slave owners and stuff. They've been able to track people now who to their ancestry of specific slaves on specific plantations, because all of those people were keeping really, really good track of it. And then we've had like really like a whole bunch of censuses that the U.S. was very particular about keeping track. So lineage is very, very easy to track. Furthermore, I would say that so I would, and immigrants were incredibly like few during the time, like shortly after slavery and emancipation. So I would say black people from that time period, I think immigrants made up literally less than 1% of the population, less than 1%. So I would say people from that time period, we should be able to give them reparations. I think for facility purposes, right? Like just to make it easy. I would also say like the reparations plan that I would look at would be in the same areas that I'm like describing that the government did for everyone else. It would be in the form of free education, as well as loan forgiveness for people who paid for their education. It would be mortgage forgiveness for people who purchase homes, and interest-free loans, interest-free mortgage loans. It would also be loan forgiveness for businesses and interest-free business loans for the people who deserve the reparations, who would be descendants of slaves, obviously. And I would say that those areas would immediately create all of the financial mobility that's necessary. You immediately create wealth in a person if you give them an interest-free loan, because literally every single payment made on that mortgage is immediately capitalized as or able to be capitalized as equity, right? Like if I have $100,000 loan, but it's interest free, every penny I pay towards that loan is that much equity in that home, right? Like literally, it's just free equity. So if I paid $10,000 off of the $100,000 loan and there was no interest, then that means that $10,000 is just equity. If I sold the home for $100,000, I would still be able to keep that $10,000, right?
Yeah.
So then that means that every single penny of equity is actually realized equity. So then, and of course, we obviously know that the house wouldn't stay at $100,000. It would continue to increase. I think it's like 7% or 12% in California. So 12.5%. So like, obviously that immediately creates the equity. As far as education, we understand that people who have education make significantly more money than their uneducated counterparts. Business loans, like entrepreneurs, they make a decent amount of money as well. And so I think doing those interest-free loans gives everyone the mobility necessary. And I would also actually ask for direct cash payments as well. But I don't think any one of those things without the other three things would obviously be, I think, harmful. Or not harmful, but I don't think it would actually accomplish everything that it's supposed to.
Direct cash payments, that would be difficult to. I mean, looking at the politics of America, I don't think that would fly. I think you could possibly do free education.
So what you're talking about now, if you're talking about political viability, that's a total different conversation. But if we're talking about what would be effective, what would be fair, and what the country owes, I would say that all four of those things together would accomplish.
What level would you extend it within a family tree? I mean, you know, there's like first generation descendants of slaves, second generation. To what level are you stopping? Are you stopping those reparations? Are you giving it to every single black person that's a descendant of slave? Or
I would say so, but again, the slavery isn't even the thing that we would be giving the equity for. We'd be giving it for the discrimination within housing, the discrimination within business loans, the discrimination within education, right? Those are the things that we'd be paying for. And people living today, right now, are the beneficiaries of that oppression, right? Again, think about it. The Fair Housing Act wasn't passed until my mother was 14 years old, okay? My grandmother just passed, I want to say 5 years ago. 5 years ago, tops. It might have been 4 years ago, but we'll say 5 years ago, just so that we're 100% sure. The house that my grandmother left to my parents, right, because she owned a home, left to my mother, that house was bought before the Fair Housing Act was even passed, meaning that its value was not as high as the people who had bought homes like in the neighborhoods they were allowed to. The Fair Housing Act, just so that because you might not be aware of the history, back in the day, before the passing of the Fair Housing Act, black people literally could not buy homes in white neighborhoods. You just could not. They literally had on deeds, this deed cannot be sold to black people. So you could only buy houses in worse neighborhoods. So you can look at the people who bought homes in those houses, same square feet, right? Then maybe the home you buy a home back then for, I don't know, $50,000, okay? And that house now might be worth $500,000. Whereas if you look at the same house with the same kind of footage, square feet, purchased in a white neighborhood, bought for the exact same price, is now worth $2.5 million, okay? So then you have to realize that my mother still reaped the benefits of that oppression literally 5 years ago. My dad had to drink from blacks only fountains. So then this isn't reparations for just slavery. This would be reparations for the ongoing systemic oppressions still impacting black Americans today.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, okay, yeah, that could work. I'm just a bit. Do you think that alone would cause change, or do you think there would still be some level of agency that still needs to occur at some point to say, okay, what direction are you going to move in terms of your life as a person? I mean, I think for me, one of the arguments I think I always found it difficult to argue with was about getting jobs, because I think there was a study released about how if you're a black person in America, you have as much chance of getting a job as a white person. I think you have less chance of getting a job as a white person if a criminal. I think that the researcher she sent out like lots of CVs, and white people with criminal records had better chances of getting jobs than a black person with a degree.
Yes.
And I think that was the area where I've seen that, yeah, like that. I don't think can be argued with. It's clear that there's still racial issues in America that impact black Americans basically till today. So I think I've never been able to argue that. But I mean, for me, I just feel like even with money, would you not still be a bit concerned about maybe cultural influences still having an impact in terms of overall direction of and I think even when I think we have to be clear that when it was, because I think I don't want to sound like a white supremacist who talks about the 13% and all this kind of bullshit, because the reality is that even if you're looking at those numbers of criminality and whatever, it's still only a small amount of black people doing that. Right. It's not really it's not like a huge amount of people doing it. So I mean, looking at that demographic, do you think that would be enough to change those issues there? Sure. I mean, because I would really.
Okay, yeah. So let's look at a few things. One, recidivism, right? You know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, what dropped the recidivism rate 50%? Or you probably wouldn't know. The Pell Grant.
I wouldn't know.
The Pell Grant, which was just simply the ability to get extra loans from the government to pay for college while you're in prison. Prior to Bill Clinton, another Democrat, people in prison were able to use the Pell Grant to pay for college while you were in prison. And people who had access to it had a significantly lower recidivism rate. Meaning if you got an education, then you still had opportunities when you got out. And so then you were more likely to be able to find employment. And so then therefore you were less likely to perpetuate the cycles of criminality that landed you in prison in the first place, right? Yet Bill Clinton took that away. Bill Clinton took that away in 96. Okay? So then if you start looking at those kinds of things, obviously then the idea that these people are just perpetually and irrevocably criminal is just not true. Simply including that type of stuff would create the opportunity for people to better themselves and not perpetuate the cycle. So furthermore, do I think that like money is going to be the end all be all? Probably not. But what I do think is what we've seen is that giving people like opportunities does change things. For example, like the single fatherness, right? Likely criminality and things like that does not affect black middle class Americans to the same degree that it does impoverished black Americans. right? So then if that's the case, then creating this economic mobility, the educational opportunity, etc., would immediately mobilize so many people that it would dramatically alter the culture. Because unless you're still operating under this like misunderstanding that the culture is caused by the people and not by the policies and the circumstances in the environment, right? If you recognize that the culture is like, if you recognize that those are the causes of the culture, immediately giving people this mobility now allows them to escape the environment and policies and things that are still impacting impoverished people today. So yes, it would dramatically change it. Will it immediately fix the racism and evil white people? No, not necessarily. There's going to be some evil Caucasians that are still going to want to perpetuate these things and will become immediately jealous of the success of the people who are now actually doing better because the government righted its wrong. But will it immediately give, again, people opportunities to escape like that type of injustice and the perpetual white supremacy? Of course. If I have an education now and you're giving me the ability to create entrepreneurship, which means now I get to hire more black people into jobs, I get to go into business for myself, creating more economic opportunities. All of these things would dramatically change everything. Like, again, it's not going to fix literally everything, but it's going to do a lot, right?
Yeah, I think access to education would be a massive thing. Being able to go to university without
the debt.
The debt, yeah, that would be crazy.
Yeah,
that would be crazy.
Home ownership. What percentage of Black Americans do you think own a home in America today? What percentage do you think?
If I had to guess, I'd probably say maybe I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I'd probably say 20% or 25%. I don't know.
That sounds a little low, don't you think?
Yeah. I'm just guessing based on the poverty stats. Stats. I'm guessing based on that.
And that's pretty freaking ridiculous, right? Like for only 25%, that would be insane. Think about it. Okay, well, I'm gonna give you the actual number now. It's 3% of Black Americans own a home. 3%. So then if you start looking at these things and you start saying, well, what changes the environment? Home ownership creates equity. Equity is what white parents were using to pay for their student loans. Like for the student loans of their children, to pay for their students' college. That's how they did so. That's how they were able to fund their retirements. That's how they were able, so that's humongous. Furthermore, home ownership allows you to live in better neighborhoods because obviously the way we fund education in this country, is through taxes from homes. So when you live in suburbs with single family units where all of these houses are contributing to the education, you don't end up with like poor education standards and 40 students per classroom and teachers that are barely paid and no funding for after school programs. You just get a better education immediately. Better education increases attitudes towards education such that people are more likely to even want to pursue college, which then of course gives people more opportunity for better. My lord, bro, the system is clearly designed against us. That's why home ownership, education, and financial opportunity for entrepreneurship would drastically change the trajectory of Black Americans, and it's what this country owes us, considering the ongoing systemic oppression impacting Black folks today.
How would you say it's ongoing right now, though? How would you say it's ongoing?
Well, the thing that you already mentioned, right? Like about that study where Black people with a criminal were less likely to get a job than people with a criminal record. That lets you know there. People with Black sounding names getting 50% less callbacks on their resumes just because they have Black sounding names. I would say the ongoing systemic oppression or the ongoing poverty caused by the systemic oppression, right? The debt cycles, because systemic oppression pays dividends. It's not like, oh man, my grandparents were impoverished, so that has no impact on me. No, if they were impoverished, they were more likely to raise me in poverty and to give me the same, that dejection passes down, right, to the next generation. Where do you think people again are going to develop the mentality that says I would like to succeed, or that I have the goal and the ambition and the drive to push past or to seek for these opportunities, when you're not even aware that these things are where these things are, and everyone you've seen around you has failed because there's still been these ongoing problems. Housing discrimination to this day. we still find out that people, when they go to sell their homes, their appraisal ratings for Black Americans are significantly lower than their white counterparts. To the fact that now Black people, when they're going to get their homes appraised, are taking down all their family pictures, replacing them with white people, and having a white person be there, like while the appraiser is there, so that the appraiser thinks there's a white person there, so that they can increase the appraisal of their home by 20%. They're still doing that today. Or if we look at even the recent mortgage crisis in 2009, where we find out all these banks settling for hundreds of millions and sometimes billions of dollars for intentionally steering Black Americans into freaking variable rate interest predatory loans, which wiped out Black debt more so than it did white debt during the housing crisis of 2009. These people lost their life savings. They lost all their investments. They now have foreclosures on their freaking credit. It put them into debt, right? As well as wiping out all those things. That just happened in 2009. That's 14 years ago. Those people are still living today. Children were born and lost in that poverty, right? So, like, again, this stuff it doesn't stop. It's not like it's just gone anywhere. And then let's talk about the cultural implications with the normalization of having children outside of wedlock and being in single family homes, right? Because it was just in the 60s when they were passing this thing about, I'm sorry, it's still where they had the no child and no father, no man in the house rule for welfare, right? Like that was lasting all the way into the 80s. So you have entire generations of people who were raised with single families that didn't have a father in the home. What do you think of those young men that were raised without their fathers and don't have the normalization of that? Hey, it's imperative that I raise my own children, that I'm there and supporting my children. Or the young girls who grew up without their dad and don't have the realization that I need to make sure that I'm picking partners that are family oriented and understand the necessity of like raising children together, right? Like all of those cultural things are still here. There's been nothing to offset these things. So yeah, the oppression is still there. And if it's not immediate, then the obviously downstream effects of the oppression are still obviously felt and lived today.
I'll be very honest. I mean, this conversation has been eye-opening. I didn't really fully understand the extent. And I think I kind of had a perception that, obviously what had happened in the past would have had an impact on the culture, but I didn't really wasn't able to conceptualize it and see how it would have happened. I think you've kind of put it into, you've painted a good picture of how that could have occurred.
Thank you.
For me. So that's do you have any books that you would read or to get some more information regarding this or?
Oh man,
stuff?
I'm so terrible with it. There's a guy, doctor. I can't. Man, here, give me a little bit of time. I'll find them. There's like there were like 3 really, really important people that I think really like kind of laid it out. You got to give me a little bit. I'll find those books. If you can just DM me or something, and then I will find those books and I will send them to you for sure. Or I'll link them to you.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, because I think I've kind of had perspectives, but I've not really been able to put it into words of how it could impact or the culture kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you've kind of put it into you've painted a good picture of how it could have happened, or how it has happened, maybe.
Right.
So it would be good to read up on it a bit more, just to kind of
verify everything that I'm saying as well, for sure.
Yeah, verify and also ground my perspective as well. Because I think for me, I think the issue for me has always been that, from my perspective, like I was born in America actually, so I know I sound like a British person, but I was born in America. But from like a young age, I was moved to Nigeria, and then I came to the UK. So like I think for me and my siblings, we were never really spoken to about. I think we kind of had the what you spoke about, the pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of mentality of there's going to be issues, but if you work hard enough, then you're going to be able to get somewhere. But I think the issue with that kind of thinking is, like, I think what I was trying to say originally when I was speaking about this was that if your parents have been in a situation whereby this is what's all around them,
mm-hmm.
then it becomes difficult to kind of tell, because they're only going to teach their kids what they know,
right?
Whereas my mum, I think my family was well off originally. Half of my family was well off, so I was like, it's weird in Nigeria. Half of my family's well off, half of my family's not. So, she was able to afford to come to the UK back and forth, whenever she wanted, basically. So I think for her, they've always kind of had this thing of education, education. You know, you need
Mm-hmm.
to be where your uncles are and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I think that's kind of pushed us um in terms of where we are now. And I think also, I think to be fair to a lot of Africans, because of what we see in Africa in terms of poverty, we
Mm-hmm.
kind of don't want to waste the opportunity when we're in the UK or in America, you know.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, even with one of my cousins, she's in America right now, and she's doing quite well. And when you were speaking about your mum, I was trying to you know, juxtapose that on with her and
Mm-hmm.
say, well, you know, she's kind of done the same thing. But then when you mentioned if you're going to night school and you've got kids, how do you manage that if you're by yourself or if you haven't got a partner or whatever? So that becomes an issue.
Right.
So yeah, I think yeah, that's where I found a difficulty because from my experience, it's been like, okay, yeah, you know, just work hard. If you work hard, then you're gonna get to where you need to get to, you know, regardless
Sure.
of whatever's in your way, kind of thing. So then it's like for me, it's like, why can't other people do the same thing? Why can't you do? Where is it coming from that it's
Mm-hmm.
not, you know, coming up? So
But I want to just
I've
say a
realized
few
that, yeah,
things really quick, though.
go
I'm
on,
not in disagreement with you. I do think at
yeah,
the individual level, in the same way that you're saying, I prescribe the exact same thing. Work freaking hard. Do everything in your power. And intentionally pursue careers that are particularly lucrative such that you'll be able to like escape some of the poverty. Really do focus on education. Really do focus on staying out of like all of these negative traps, right? Having children out of wedlock, getting married when you're not financially like able, like the absence of pursuing of education, developing criminal records. All of these things are like things that will drag you down. It's on you to avoid those types of behavior. But while I think that way, I also recognize that the average person in given environments, a great number of them are going to like assimilate to that environment, and that environment is caused by the culture. So while I will always tell an individual, you are responsible for your own destiny, I will also recognize that the environment will shape a lot of people's destinies. Because again, we're talking normative, not what I would prescribe an individual, but what is likely, what is expected, what's realistic. And for most people, they're going to choose the path of least resistance. It is a very difficult thing to be surrounded by an environment and to have the mentality that I'm better and I will not succumb to the negative aspects of this environment. That is not a normal thing. So if it's not a normal thing, well, I would tell an individual, you don't let that environment impact you. I know it's not realistic for most people for that not to impact them. And that's the state of Black
yeah,
America.
yeah. That's the issue. That's the issue. Well, that's the state of Africa as well. So yeah, why are you a Pan-Africanist again?
Well, I'm not necessarily Pan-Africanist anymore, and I think again that's because of like these negative stereotypes and things that happen. Because as I was saying, you know, think about it this way: you and I are having what I consider to be a really decent conversation, and you seem to be
Yeah,
one of those people who's very open-minded and not set in your ways. And it seems like even in this conversation, when you're encountering something that you don't know, you've said to me, "Oh, I don't know," or "I've never heard of that," or I'm unaware," right?
yeah,
There's a difference between you and the type of people who already believe they know the answers, who have already been indoctrinated and inculcated with really negative stereotypes and beliefs. And so then at this point, there's no amount of explanation that can make them realize that they're perpetuating white supremacy and ignorant to the cause of these outcomes. And so that perspective, this new knowledge for you, a lot of immigrants don't have that. And they're not willing to have this conversation. They're not willing to educate themselves. And so then as a result of that, they have incredibly negative views and beliefs about Black people, right? So then if that's the case, how am I supposed to ally with a person who looks down on me, believes that they're better than me, perpetuates white supremacist talking points, is against reparations because it's just a handout to people who don't deserve it because we were never enslaved, etc. And all of these types of perspectives, how do I ally with the person who has all of those beliefs? And again, let's talk normativity again, right? I expect you to have that mentality. I expect you to believe the way you do because it took a while for me to even develop the education that I have on these subjects. I did not understand the extent of the poverty. My mother did, I think, a great job at demonstrating hard work and all of these. Again, I always attribute a lot of this to God, but all of these morals and things that allowed a lot of us to see that hard work and determination and things like that did work out for her with God knows how many different miracles. So the idea is, I didn't understand the extent of it, but I could now, as an adult, look back and see the people around me and the people who were impacted by all of this, the environment and all of those kinds of things. And now I can see, and of course, I've been reading and finally figuring out how the fair housing worked and all these different policies and stuff. Then I can get it and be like, oh, this is the system. This is what's impacting us. So then I don't expect other people to do that work. I expect other people to say, I did it, why can't you? And only to have that view, not recognizing the environment, the culture, the policy, the et cetera, and therefore to be incredibly antagonistic. To ally with a person who is intentionally and consciously antagonistic towards your success spells your own doom. Why would we do that? So it's hard for me to be a Pan-Africanist. Keeping in mind, as I told you, the two people that I think I'm the closest to, like over the last 10 years, as I mentioned before, my boy Jeff, my boy Inside, both of whom are immigrants. Neither one of those people are descendants of slavery, but they're not antagonistic. They're both incredibly intelligent people, very empathetic people, and are very on code. So I don't paint every person in that way. I'm never going to be that Tariq Nasheed type that's just immediately antagonistic towards all immigrants. I think the biggest focus should be white supremacy, while simultaneously recognizing that endemic within the immigrant culture is an antagonism towards black people, black Americans.
Yeah. I think for me, I think the Pan-Africanism thing is just, I think even if Africans weren't antagonistic towards black Americans, I would still say until Africa is able to sort its own issues, I just don't think it's I just don't think it's viable. I just think there's a lot of issues there in terms of governance, and I think quite similar issues, I would say, to actually what black Americans have faced, really, in terms of how government policies and actions have resulted in a population that essentially is just unable to really, well, just, if I'm being honest, just ignorant, basically. Sure. You know, that's just the reality of the situation. And I know, you know, it sounds blunt, but that's just the reality of Africa right now, you know. So but anyone,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I mean anyone who's a Pan-African, I think before they choose that option, they need to realize what they're trying to get into in terms of Africa. You know, it's just a lot of harm. Like I said, it's very similar to, I won't say very similar, but it's similar to the situation in America, whereby you've had a group of people who've been co-opted. The leaders have been co-opted, and because of that co-option, it's led to Africa being the way it is now. You know, lack of education, massive lack of education has just resulted in lots of ignorance, and you know, the people are where they are now. So you know, that's the issue. And I don't know how it's going to change, really. I don't know how it's going to change. And I think for me, when you're speaking about reparations in America, the only thing that worries me is just you know, like we've mentioned, that the full process is, you know, you can have the money, you can have the opportunities, but if the damage has already been done, you know, it's going to be difficult for that to change. You know, it's going to be very difficult for that to change. It's just why, because
it is,
because when you have human beings, you know, live in a certain way, to change that behavior, to change perspective, it's almost like changing a part of your personality, almost, in a way. It feels weird to do, you know.
For sure.
So, you know, whenever you have that situation.
But I want to be sure that I'm not saying that it'll be effective for literally everybody, right? Like, it's not going to immediately change some of these hood niggas on the corner. Some of them are going to have to go to sleep for good.
For good.
You knew exactly what I was getting. I'm sorry, I had to take that. That's insane to me. That was one of the funniest clips I've ever seen in my life. But hold on, I want to say something about the Pan-Africanism thing really quick, though, before we get off of that. Because look, my argument at the time when I was having it, like I told you, I used to feel this way, was like, well, okay, if we talk about the black dollar circulation, right? It needs to circulate more within the black community, which will create like economic opportunity and things like that. And we find that almost every other culture does it, right? Like, there's not a whole bunch of Salvadorian enclaves as opposed to Mexican enclaves, as opposed to Venezuelan enclaves, as opposed to whatever, right? Like, it's just Hispanics tend to come together, right? And they're not the same. A Nicaraguan is not a Salvadorian, is not an Ecuadorian, is not a whatever, right? So, but their dollar circulates amongst their communities. Same thing with Asian. When you come to this country, like, yes, you still have some of your original ethnicity, but we pretty much just blanketly label you as an Asian. It's like, oh, you're an Asian. A Chinese Asian is not a Korean Asian, it's not a Japanese Asian, it's not a freaking Indian, right? Like, so ultimately, but there's still these like enclaves where these dollars circulate within their community. And I think that creating that same type of thing for us would be beneficial. But again, in order for us to get those benefits, there would have to be this unification. And that unification can only come with education, where people can kind of like dismiss all of these antagonistic ideas about Black Americans to start learning about what the forces are against us. And so then at that point, then they can start then we could actually assimilate, and then we could actually start working to each other's benefit. Another negative thing that happens because of Black immigrants is those numbers are used to offset like some of the damage that's been done to Black Americans, so then they can't even see the full financial impact of these policies. Because if you have a certain class of these people who are particularly educated, who are particularly wealthy and have better incomes, then you can use those numbers so that we don't see the full damage of the Black people in America who don't have those opportunities, who don't have that financial, like, you know what I'm saying, whatever. So there's all of these things that, like, yes, it's a messy thing. So while it is a dream of mine that one day this type of education will happen such that we can fully unify, until that happens, I have to be realistic enough to say that these people are almost impossible to ally with en masse. Not that there aren't individuals and so on and so forth. Go ahead.
You know, I think it's funny. I feel like I think when Africans are in America and they interact with Black Americans, those perspectives may be present, but I feel like if you were to go to Africa, I feel like the perspective would be different. You would be viewed as, it's almost like it would be like a white person going to Africa. When a white person goes to Nigeria, for example, they're viewed as automatically wealthy, more intelligent, just because of their skin color. So in a similar way, I think if a American was to go to Africa, you would be viewed in the same way. You'd be viewed as automatically you're wealthy. You must be intelligent because you've come from America. You know, you must have all these attributes just because of where you come from. But I think the issue with Africa is just that, you know, even if things were okay, it's just the whole continent, I would say, in terms of Western Africans and even Southern Africans outside of South Africa, is just, it's just a shit show, to be honest, you know.
Somewhat. I mean, but I think because look, you find both, right? Because there are some Africans who very much love us, and like encourage us to come over there and visit and tell us to relocate and things like that. But then there's some over there that still have these negative attitudes about us as well. Particularly in Nigeria, it seems like Nigeria has some serious antagonism towards Black Americans. And so, like, I think Tariq,
really?
Yeah. And you know what's really interesting? You know, Tariq Nasheed used to be on that Pan-African movement, and he went over to Africa. And after getting there is where he developed this like sentiment that, they really hate us. And then that's when he kind of like developed a lot of that nonsense. Because prior to that, he was like, I'm all like pro-African, yada, 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 yada. I think traveling there and encountering that is where it was like, then he started kind of waking up to some of the antagonism and some of the negative attitudes and things, and that's when he started developing his own like biases against them. And I think that it's just gone too far. I think anything just needs to be checked and balanced, and I just don't think that it's balanced anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I said what I said was because even me as a Nigerian, I can speak somewhat like, you know, I'm from a tribe called the Yoruba tribe, so like we're kind of one of the four biggest tribes in Nigeria.
Right.
So I can speak the language to some extent, but when I go back there, even when I start speaking the language, they know because of the way I'm speaking it, they're not, you're a foreigner. So they automatically view me as a bit different from everyone else. But because they know I'm from the UK, they automatically view me as, you must be intelligent, you must be wealthy, you must be all these kind of things just because you're from there. So I feel like I'm shocked that when Tariq went there, and they heard him speak, they would have had this. I think it's like, I think it's maybe, yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. It's weird. I feel like Africans going to America, they have those perspectives because they're a bit more soaked in terms of the culture. They see a lot more of the media and stuff and portrayal of Black Americans. But in Africa, most of the shows are still like really African shows. I think, you know, where it comes to seeing anything portrayed of Black Americans, probably be movies or music videos.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the shows there are still going to be African, you know, TV shows and stuff like that. So, yeah, I'm surprised by that. But yeah, that's wow. I didn't know. Like I said, you know, I was oblivious to all of this till about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
You know,
Same.
I was oblivious to about 2 years ago. So, yeah, you know, that's the issue. But I'm just saying, anyone who wants to be a Pan-Africanist, yeah, it's just I think you need to realize how bad things are in Africa before you consider having that position. Because boy,
but here's the deal: why are things so bad in Africa?
I think for me, I'll be very honest. Much as the Black American issue, I think there's been a lot of impact. There's been a lot of impact in terms of colonialism.
Absolutely. Besides Ethiopia, which group of people aren't victims of like recent colonialism? Besides,
absolutely. But
there we go.
But where I differentiate both issues, right? Because I've said it's kind of similar to Black America, but where I differentiate based on what you've kind of laid down to me today in terms of the conversation we've had, there was still in your case there was no agency. So like, it wasn't a situation where like, okay, yeah, we're going to give you the option of giving you homes, and it's up to you whether or not you want to have those homes or not in good areas or whatever. We're going to give you the option of going to school and whatever. It's up to you whether. In terms of Africa, because in terms of Nigerian history, the way it worked was, I think when independence occurred, the British basically wanted to keep the Northern Africans in power, because the Northern Africans were a lot less educated than the Southern Africans. So what they did was they put the Northern Africans in power. They gave a role to like someone like I think a guy from my party. They made him like a vice president or whatever of the country. And then they gave another role to like somebody from the Igbo tribe or whatever. So, but what they were doing was kind of like creating a situation whereby there was kind of like crabs in a what was it? Crabs in a barrel or whatever. What's the saying?
Yep.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer, crabs in
Yeah,
a
yeah,
barrel.
yeah, exactly. So that kind of situation. So and then they rigged the elections. The first elections in Nigeria, they rigged the elections to have the person that they wanted to be in power to be in power. But I think the issue that has been with Nigeria is, as soon as they did that, you know, it kind of created a situation whereby, following that first election, every election was almost kind of rigged. So essentially, the tribes would kind of take it in turns. So like, okay, yeah, this year the Yoruba tribe's going to be in power, and then it's going to be the Igbo tribe and whatever. After the civil war, that kind of changed, and then Igbos, you know, now they're being discriminated against in Nigeria, whatever. So, but you know, so that happened, and that happened. But there's agency there, you know. For what gets me annoyed about Nigeria is that we had a situation whereby we could have said, okay, yeah, we've been under colonialism for so long. We've been given independence. Let's work together to make this country great, you know. But you just had a situation whereby people in power just said, you know what, like, we're just gonna try to, like, you know, milk as much from the country as possible. Basically, you know, Nigeria was a country that when the first recession happened, after the Great Depression, I can't remember when it was. While other countries were in recession, Nigeria was still okay. Nigeria was a country like a country in the West, basically, in Africa. Like other African countries around Nigeria there would be lots of immigration from those countries to Nigeria to work, basically. And that's why, like, my mum back there, around the time when she was coming to the UK, she could come back and forth between the UK and Nigeria and go to America whenever she wanted, because, you know, the economy was that strong. But because of the level of corruption in the country, like, it's just been decimated. Like, you look at pictures of Nigeria in the past, and it looks like, you know, like countries in the past and in the future, and like as the years, come, the country improves. Nigeria is different. It gets worse. It gets worse in Nigeria. Like, I mean, there's rich parts of Nigeria like Lekki and parts of Lagos that are really to basically so wealthy to the point that it's basically like living in the West, basically. But for me, the fact that there was agency there for the leaders to say, okay, yeah, this is what you guys want to do. You guys want us to do this, but no, we're going to choose to do the right thing. We're going to choose to actually have democracy. We're going to choose to actually think about the people as a whole and not just ourselves. It's just, yeah, for me, I can't get my head around that. I can't, like, just that reality of there was agency there to do the right thing and you still chose to do the wrong thing. And now because of you guys at the top, the whole situation is fucked. It's difficult for me to accept that. And I don't even like thinking about Nigeria just because when I just have that in my head, it just makes me so angry because I'm like, that's where I should be right now. I should be living there and just, thinking about, what I'm going to do in Lagos and whatever. But because of how bad the country has been run, this is so, like, even like my mom, like now when she speaks about certain things in America or like Americans or whatever, I'm thinking like, like, you're from, like, look at the country that we're from. Like, we can't really even be having too much chest to be saying stuff about, Black Americans. Like, to be honest, So I don't know. Yeah, that's my perspective anyway.
I mean, I respect it. I think my ire would not be at the people who like were probably super self-interested, and because I think people are particularly self-motivated unless they already have like a pretty functioning society that they can subscribe to. So again, my ire would still be aimed at white supremacy there, not the individuals who decided to look out for their best when they recognized that there were oppressive outside forces and didn't like unify with the rest of the country. I'd be looking at the country that set them up for failure and decided, hey, okay, we're gonna pit one against the other, and not the people that succumbed to it. If that makes sense to me, like if that makes sense, like. Why be angry at the Nigerians and not the freaking country that rigged the election and created this division and this crabs in a barrel mentality, which we're just seeing perpetuated? That just doesn't make sense to me.
Because the country rigged the elections and created the crabs in a barrel mentality, but it didn't create it without the people agreeing to be part of that. That's my issue. If it was a thing whereby they forced these guys to do this, then that's a different situation. But
were there many opportunities to succeed outside of that? If these people recognize that those people are in power,
we've had I think we've had about 2 or 3 coups in Nigeria, and I think each time it's been always the same thing of like the people coming in saying, oh yeah, we want to make things different. There's been corruption. And then the same people that are coming in just do the same thing. This is why I'm kind of hesitant around the whole Niger Gabon situation. I'm like, well, let's wait a bit to see what actually happens because, I'm from Nigeria. I've seen a lot of these coups happen and it doesn't really go the way you think it should go. So let's calm down on that. But, for me, like I said, I cannot get around the fact that you still have a choice to make in that situation. You still have a decision to make whereby you say, no, I'm not going to engage in the corruption. I'm not going to engage in the rigging of the elections. I'm not going to engage in just stealing the money from the country. This is to the point where when I was working in a hospital in the UK, there was a guy that was working there with me that he came from, he used to work for the energy company in Nigeria called NEPA. And NEPA is an energy company whereby I think we have a load shedding. So every week, basically, the electricity cuts off. So a lot of homes in Nigeria have generators to produce electricity. And this guy spoke about how, when he was in the office one day, one of the managers just came out of office with a full bag of just money. This is the kind of stuff that happens, and this is what the leaders are doing. So because the leaders are doing it, it just bleeds down to almost every aspect of the country. So much so that when my mom goes to Nigeria now, she can't tell anyone. She can't tell anyone she's coming because even with your family members, you have to be worried about, what could happen to you if they know that you're coming to the country. It's just, for me, I find it, I can acknowledge the colonialism and the oppression that's occurred there, but still, you gained independence. you had an opportunity to create a country within your own, what you call it, uh, image or whatever, and you fucked it up majorly.
So
To
it
me,
sounds to me like you're upset that the crabs in a barrel still functioned like crabs in a barrel once they had semblance of independence. You guys got a
well,
semblance of independence and still functioned like crabs in a barrel, which had
these,
already been set up by
yeah,
these
but
evil
these,
Europeans.
yeah, but these individuals were highly educated individuals. They didn't have to do what they did. They didn't have to do it.
We're
Like,
not talking about
if you
half.
listen to,
We're just talking about like again, like you're saying that they didn't have to do it is that's true, but you're decrying people functioning like crabs in a barrel who were crabs in a barrel. That's what's happening right
but
now.
crabs in a barrel happens because the people in the barrel choose to be the crabs in the barrel. It doesn't just
They
happen
didn't
on its own.
choose to be crabs in a barrel. That stuff happened
Nah, they chose,
before
man.
them. You're saying they decided
They
to
chose, man.
maintain it, but they already had the
They chose.
mentality. Have you ever heard of the phrase learned helplessness? You ever heard of that before?
No, no, I never. No.
Oh man, that's a whole lot. That's a whole nother conversation. We could have that another day, maybe if you're down anytime. But I think
Yeah.
this conversation it's kind of ran its course. Yeah, there's a lot. But look, ultimately, I mean, like I said, I'm always going to hold white supremacy accountable when white supremacy does its evil things, and I'm going to be first. I'm going to look at them first. While I can hold individuals accountable for doing evil things, and I always will, the person who decides to rob me, I'm going to look at that person sideways, while never taking my eye off of the government that created the circumstances that would even motivate a person to want to rob me. You understand? Like, we can do both. That's my
Yeah,
mentality.
we can do both, but I still feel like they are the biggest impact of what's happened now. That's just what I feel. I feel like they are the biggest impact of what happened now because it's like when white supremacists talk about when they talk about the differences in countries. I think people don't understand how delicate keeping a country like America the way it is. It's very simple for things to degrade into anarchy. People are literally choosing to abide by certain laws, you know. But that happens because you have leaders who have kind of laid down a foundation that kind of breeds through the rest of the society, But when you have the situation that Africans have, then yeah, this is what you get. And we can talk about the colonialism, we can talk about oppression, but when you have the independence, you still have a choice to make in terms of how you want to govern. And you can look at other people in other countries like Frank, what's his name? The guy from Burkina Faso, what was his name? Gosh, I forgot his name. Is it Frank Sankara or something? He had the same situation whereby he was trying to improve his country. What happens? The French come in, co-opt one of his friends, they kill him. This is the running theme of just Africans in terms of people just choosing not to think about the country as a whole and only thinking about themselves.
It's my
Unfortunately.
belief. It's my belief that that's why Tariq Nasheed refuses to call himself the leader of the FBA cult.
Why? What do you mean? Why?
Is because the same thing that you're talking about there is the same thing that happens to every black American that decides to become a leader. Martin Luther King became a leader.
Okay.
Obviously, they killed him, and we now know that the government was heavily involved with that. Right? It wasn't just the Ku Klux Klan;
Yeah.
it was actually the CIA and the FBI that were involved in that. Then we have the same thing happened to Malcolm X. We understand that now that he wasn't murdered just by his own people, and that the CIA and the FBI were heavily involved with that. Fred Hampton was murdered yet again by our own government. So it wasn't just like, oh man, it seems like anytime you have revolutionary-minded leaders within certain cultures, that the power structures, which typically the people who have been evil enough to maintain them have been white people, those people end up doing things to like undermine those potential leaders, and it happens again every single time. Even when you look at cases like Bob Marley, where it's just like the government, they got involved and did nonsense. When it comes to countries like Haiti, and you see yet again the government get involved in doing its nonsense. So it just seems like that's the standard. That's just the way things go.
If Nigeria was like Haiti, then I would blame the colonialists. See, if Nigeria was like Haiti, I would blame the colonials for that situation, because there's no agency. That's pure oppression.
But no,
That's,
but once
oh,
they
we're
got
gonna
their agency, then yeah, the government still got involved and started doing things like rigging elections, like funding
yeah,
coups through the Clintons and
but the
things like
difference
that.
there though, the difference there is, that's more similar to Black American situation. That the oppression has been so crazy already that, yeah, at that point it's like, okay, yeah, now I can acknowledge that. Whereas in my situation, in my country situation, is no, there was just, oh, just there you go, do your thing. Like, now make a decision. Do you want to work with us in terms of, doing this thing, or do you want to do your own thing? And they chose to work with them. The Haiti one is, you had no choice. You were just oppressed from the get go, from
I
your apprentice. You had no choice in it.
See, I don't know enough about the situation to be able to argue, but it seems really unrealistic for me, just on the outside, to think that there was like heavy oppression at one point and then it just disappeared and they had literal total agency, and at that point they just decided to maintain it. I would think that there were probably still like semblances or residuals of power structures that were impacting them. That's what I would imagine. That's what I would assume. I mean, it's possible I'm wrong. I just don't think that it's likely. The idea that it just, all the oppression and all the people who had power just literally lost it all, and we had total, they had total autonomy, and there was just no residuals of any of that oppression. That just doesn't sound realistic to me. Does that sound realistic to you? Being honest?
Yeah. I mean, because because I mean, if I mean, what resources was Nigeria being? I'm not even sure. I mean, we've just recently found oil in the last few decades or whatever. So, and that kind of played a role in terms of the Civil War.
But don't you think the absence of major resources would be enough to probably create and perpetuate that crabs in a barrel mentality already in itself? So if your argument is that there were like very few resources, or the absence of all resources, wouldn't that be enough?
I don't, because like I said, Thomas Sankara, he didn't have the same issues. He didn't have the same issues. He got into power and said, okay, yes, what are we gonna do? We're gonna prioritize the people of the country. We're not going to prioritize leaders. We're not going to prioritize just the people in the government. No, it's going to be everyone. We're going to make laws and policies to make the life of the people of the country better. You can choose to do that. I'm not. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there was some invisible hand from the British government still doing what it was doing. I don't know. But from what I understand of the history, they left. They basically spoke to the Northerners, spoke to the Yoruba, spoke to the Igbos, and said, "Look, let's do this kind of situation." They rigged the elections, and then after that, it was just a choice of that. But even if that was the case, there was a coup.
What was the motivation to rig the election if they really wanted nothing to do with it? Isn't the fact that they rigged the election enough evidence that they still intended to meddle? Or do you think it was just like, on our way out, we're going to completely absolve all power and abdicate all of that onto the other groups? That's what we're going to do. But before we do that, we just want to do something that's going to have long-term implications, but we're not going to be a part of any of these long-term implications. We just wanted to rig the election, and then that was it. That doesn't even sound realistic.
Yes, but that's what I mean. Obviously, they rigged the elections because they still wanted to have some level of influence over the country.
But you're denying any of that level of influence over the country afterwards. You're saying they had total agency and autonomy.
Yes, but what I'm saying is, when the independence occurred, that was a time for the leaders to make a decision as to what they wanted to do. But they chose to work with the British government. They made that choice.
Independence is the question. That independence that you just kind of skirted past is the main question. Was it true independence? And I'm going to say I don't think it was, because the idea that those people had no impact anymore or no influence just doesn't sound realistic at all. They had to, man. Come on. They didn't just cede all influence and all power and give you total autonomy and total agency. That didn't happen. We know that didn't happen. Any rational person has to know that didn't happen.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Because like I said, other countries have had coups. What's his name? Not coups, but they've had independence. What was the guy from Ghana? Kwame Nkrumah. he kind of fell by the wayside eventually. I don't know what happened with him in terms of his behavior, but you know, there's been other situations where you could have prioritized the people if you wanted to, and of course, maybe there might have been pushback, but I would have preferred to have seen the pushback rather than just go along with whatever they chose to do. And even if we accept there was an invisible hand, even if we accept that, there was a coup only like I think a few years after the independence there was a coup, and yeah, things degraded even after the coup. So it's showing you know, issue with leadership there, whereby when people get in power they just want to engross themselves in wealth, unfortunately. Yeah. But I don't know. I mean, don't take my word for it. I mean, I guess do your research, see what it is. You know, make your decisions after that. Don't take my word for it.
For sure. And that, again, as I said from the very beginning, I don't know enough to know for sure. It just seems like that would be unrealistic, that they had no power, and that they had all that power and influence, intentionally rigged an election, and then completely take their hands off. That just seems implausible. It's possible. It just don't sound realistic to me. That's my stance.
But I think what I'm saying is they rigged the election because they wanted the power. But the leaders, because I think before they rigged the election, they basically had to have a meetings with the leaders of the different tribes. But the tribes didn't have to agree to the rigging. That's what I'm saying. They didn't have to agree to the rigging, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
You know?
I hear you, bro. I hear you. All right, man.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Yeah, I feel like we covered everything for the most part, right?
What I was saying, it was nice having a conversation. I mean, like I said, this is my first time using Discord. I didn't even know I was in a conversation with you. I mean, I've usually just heard you speaking to Destiny, and I remember you from. It was kind of a shock to me when I first saw you on Twitch, because I used to see you like playing Marvel in the past. So that's kind of where I kind of first saw you. So it was kind of weird, like, then seeing you with Destiny and those kind of guys, and then now having a conversation, I was like, oh shit, okay. That's why I was like, because I thought I was just in a chat, basically, watching you stream. I didn't know I was actually in a conversation with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
nice. It's really nice speaking to you. Yeah, you really opened my eyes in terms of, you know, the oppression in America. I didn't really realize it was that extensive.
Sincerely, I genuinely appreciate you being open enough to even listen to it, and to be open-minded enough to receive what I was like telling you. Like that, bro, that actually means quite a bit.
The first thing of being a human being, if you care about the truth, you have to be willing to accept that you could be wrong. So if you're not willing to accept that, then there's no point in even having a conversation.
And that's something that separates you from most people, right there. Because most people don't want to, are literally incapable of admitting that they're wrong.
Yeah.
Well,
but yeah, man, cool. It's about 2:00 and almost 2:00 where I'm at now. So
like 2 a.m.
at night.
Oh jeez, yeah. It's 5:33 p.m. I'm just now getting. I'm just getting started. But yeah, man. Yeah. I sincerely appreciate it. Anytime you want to drop by, you know, I'm always down to have more conversations. You got any nuggets of truth or something you can give me about the history of some place, I'm willing to listen and learn as well.
Definitely, man.
All right, man. You take care.
Cool. You too, man.
Peace.
Cool.